Hi, it's Peter Newman here with you, and I'm joined by Marcel from Bushel Plus in Canada. And Marcel is going to tell us a little bit about his system and what they've found with harvest losses, and in particular canola harvest losses in Canada. So, how are you, Marcel?
Hey, good. Thank you. Thank you very much for making the time and inviting us here. That's great.
What are some of the key things that you're talking to people about how to set them up? I put some stuff on Twitter a couple of days ago about how do people set their harvesters up? And I got such different results. There's so many different opinions out there about how to set these things up. So interested to hear your take on it.
Well, we started talking about, we're talking about the three major things to calibrate or check out in your combine before you even get in the field. Um, and that is, in my opinion, pre-harvest setup, calibrate your concaves and calibrate your sieves. So that means for me, if you're sitting in the cab and it shows that your concave is supposed to be on 12, and you go down and measure, it is on 12. The third one in the field is calibrate your loss sensor, because we don't want anyone to drop that tray every 5 minutes and do nothing else anymore. As you're dropping the tray, you want to calibrate your loss sensor so that you can create yourself a benchmark. So let's say you drop the tray and you're doing an amazing job. You're finding you have less than 1% loss in that particular moment. And the same second you drop the tray, you calibrate your loss sensor, or you set the sensitivity so it's in the range that you feel comfortable looking at that monitor. So now you know 1% on the back of the combine, the loss sensor was at this particular state.
And so, what about speed? Are you guys finding? So, I put some things on Twitter, some measurements on Twitter a couple of days ago, and it showed that more canola harvest losses with higher speed. But then, when we calculated it out, it was actually because slow speed gives you a higher cost of harvest. It was actually still worth going quite fast and losing some grain, but there must be a point at which we've got to stop going faster because we can end up with catastrophic losses. So, what are you finding there with speed and harvest losses?
So speed is a great question, always comes up. The last thing we're trying to do is slow our customers down. That's kind of the last thing we want to do. I'm really trying to change combine settings inside, especially sieve and wind, before I change the speed. But if we're sticking to the speed, yes, it slowing down can definitely reduce losses when you're changing nothing else. Let's say you look at it and you say, whoa, loss, slow down, and leave nothing else. I'm not a fan of it. I rather change some stuff inside first, and we had some really nice examples where we actually ended up with less loss, and the farmer was harvesting, or the custom guy in this particular example, ended up with harvesting about 3 acres an hour more, which is about a bit more than a hectare, or 1.2 hectares roughly, more per hour. So in his opinion, it was better for him to play around with it for a little bit, reduce losses, and drive faster.
Yeah, so can you tell us some of the things that you're changing there, Marcel?
Yeah, for sure. So when you drive faster, but you don't change your sieve settings, you have to keep in mind that you're putting more material through, obviously. So you're putting more material on the sieves, so you have to handle it and chaff it out quicker in a way. And let's just say we're assuming that our concave and rotor speed, drum speed is set all right now. We're not over threshing, we're not overloading the sieves. This is set good. We checked that. Now we're talking just about the sieves. So a lot of times we see that people run the sieves too far closed and the wind too low, especially in canola, because they're afraid that they're blowing out the small seeds. So really reducing the wind and trying to close the sieves. So, but what happens when you close the sieves is the wind doesn't go properly through the machine and through the sieves and is able to lift that chaff mat. So what happens is the chaff mat travels across your sieves out the back of the combine and creates the sieve loss in a way there. So if you open up your sieves and you give that air a different distribution and different chance to lift up that mat and lift, like our separator, we lift up the chaff and the kernels fall through. So more wind, more sieves, but we increase it by a certain point. Like we don't just say, just rip the sieves wide open, rip the wind wide open. We increase it point by point, and the wind certain RPMs at a time, and then we keep combining for a couple of hundred more meters until we see a change. We're not just doing drastically changes. And we're changing one thing at a time. So we're starting with the sieves, we're opening our sieves until the sample gets dirty, and then we're getting more wind onto it until that gets cleaner. And then we're dropping the tray again until just to make sure we're really not blowing anything out the back.
Yeah. And do you guys try and generally get below 1 bushel per acre in canola?
Yeah, it's our goal to be under 1 bushel.
Yeah.
Some conditions that is a bit tough. Depending what kind of harvester setup there is, but there is a lot of little tweaks on the front that can make a big difference in the back. And I forgot to say it in the beginning when I was talking about the calibrating. After that is really the front setup, like we say, like the header setup. So your auger height, finger timing, the draper setup. As better you feed it in the front, the better it will go through the back, and the less loss you will have, especially when we talk rotor loss or Walker or twin rotor loss on the back. So that it depends how you feed it in order to thrash it properly.
And what about rotor loss? I mean, that's something that we wouldn't think we would get in canola because it's so easy to thresh, but we do, and it is the opposite of what you think from what I can gather. And people tell me that when the day gets hot and the canola gets really dry, it really powders up in the rotor, and that's when we actually get some rotor losses. Is that what you guys find?
Yeah, we have similar findings, not just in Canada, Europe or Russia as well. So it's happening, especially in drier conditions, and it's a bit similar to the sieve. If you can't get the kernels away from the chaff, it's tough to that is the issue, to get the kernels away from the chaff. So two things that can happen. If you have a heavy crop and you can't get the kernels out of the chaff, it could be the RPMs of your drum or the rotor are not high enough because you're missing the centrifugal force to get it out of the chaff. But also remind yourself now if you open up, if you have more RPM, you're thrashing it more, you're doing more powder. But to the point, the centrifugal force helps you get the kernels out the rotor. The second thing is, if you're running your concaves too tight, or the wire distance from the concave is too close, which that means if every second wire pulled or different style wire concaves, to give that crop, that kernels away to get out of the concave quicker and let the sieves handle the separation of it instead of the in the rotor.
What is the aim? Are you trying to have the concaves tighter than you think, or not as tight? What are you normally doing?
Gotcha. So it depends a little bit on the crop. If you're talking cereals or canola.
So let's talk canola.
Okay, let's talk canola. Okay, right on. So most of the stuff, if it's that dry, it's thrashed most likely already through the feeder house. So, but if you have it, again, if you have it too tight, you're creating a lot of flour or a lot of fine chaff. But if you're opening it further, there's always 2 or 3 things in play. That's a tricky part. If you're opening it further, you will pretty much have to drive a little faster too in order to fill that gap. But I rather have a little further open instead of having it way too tight, because the further opening you have it, the more you can feed through, and the crop either threshes itself, or if it's threshed already from the feeder house, it can get separated quicker once you have more rotor speed and go through the concave onto your sieves.
So you would say concave a bit open, rotor a bit faster, sieves a bit more open and a bit more air. Does that sort of
If,
sum it up?
yeah, if you wanna make it really easy, it'd be nice if it will always work.
Yeah.
But yeah, kind of that. This is the overall concept that we're going with.
And what do you
Again, it
think
needs
about
to be
skip?
careful and
What do you think about skip wires and so on? Do you encourage people to have those, or and large wire concaves, or do you encourage people to have the smaller wires in there?
so we usually start with the smaller wire concaves. And when you say skip concaves, do you mean every second wire pulled? Is that what you mean?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we usually start with small wire concaves, and then when we see we can't get it out of the concaves, that's when we start adjusting or having every second wire pulled, or looking at concaves that have wider opening.
Yeah.
And again, that's two big things for that, because it's not that Marcel says that and it will work everywhere. It's really, it depends on your front setup. Like the header setup is really, really important to how it goes into the combine. That's how you determine if your rotor is thrashing it properly or not. So a lot of times rotor loss is actually created by the front. If you don't feed it properly on the front
Mm.
into the feeder house, that's where you start creating problems already. And then the next thing is variety. Varieties are thrashing differently as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've learned a lot from farmers back, like we learn a lot from each other when we're in the field, and variety is a big thing there as well. But major thing, front, feed it in the feeder house properly, head in first, don't have it bundled up, make sure the feeder house is fed in, that you use the entire width of the feeder house. There's auger slidings or slidings on headers that you can adjust so it feeds the full width of the feeder house, and you use pretty much every inch you have there to
Yeah.
feed it properly.
Yeah. We probably need to think about wrapping it up, Marcel. But can you just finish with some examples? I mentioned earlier you guys try and get under a bushel an acre, which I think is 58 kilograms per hectare for canola. But what have you found? You've got an example coming up on the screen now, but have you got some stories of where people were harvesting, and particularly with canola because the seed is so small, and they just didn't realise how much they were throwing on the ground until they put your tray on?
Yes. So the biggest example for us is probably the independent research that associations are doing here in North America, and they show that the average canola harvest loss in Western Canada is about 4 to 6 bushel an acre.
Really?
Which,
Wow.
yeah, and that is the average.
So 4 to 6 bushel, just to convert that, is roughly 230 kilograms per hectare through to 300 and say 50 kilograms per hectare. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, that is a lot of money. That's a lot of money that's not in the bin but left in the field for the farmer, and that is independent reason. Those are numbers from the last. Yeah, those people have been working on it for quite a few years.
And it's interesting that you say that you don't want to slow people down. A lot of our message so far has been slow down, and the more I'm learning about that, that's not necessarily the answer, because if we slow down, our harvest cost goes up, and then we're risking shattering at the end of harvest. So I think that's something I've really learned in the last week, that we need to try and aim to harvest fast with low losses, and we need to learn a lot from you guys about how to do that.
Yeah, and you want to find again, there is no black and white. You want to find that sweet spot. You're on the right track there.
Well, I'm going to wind up the recording here. So thanks again for your time, and yeah, hopefully we'll see you in Australia in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, right on. Thank you very much. Happy harvest.
Thanks, mate.